Let me just say, if you think you know Static because you watched Static Shock's show, you've only got half the story. There's a lot in there that isn't straight from the comics, and there's a little bit more in the comic, and that's what we're getting into today. He's one of the most popular but slept on characters that has ever graced the comic book world on pages and screens since the 90s. He's popped in and out of some of your favorite DC animated projects and books, with one of the best animated show intro jingles that I wish I could play for you, but I can't afford the copyright hit. Let me introduce you to the legend that is Static. And I know there's going to be a ton of people who think that his name is actually Static Shock. That's the show. His name is Static. Think like Batman Beyond. Terry is just Batman, but the show and comics are often called Batman Beyond. And if you've been here since I posted my video on Icon, yes, I slipped in that video when I called Static Static Shock. I'd like to blame the copious amounts of coffee that I've consumed since I started to post videos on YouTube, but it's just me. If you thought I was going to try to be perfect, you were sorely mistaken. Welcome to the channel. Though Static Shock does almost sound cooler, like a first and last name type of a thing, and obviously that's why it's a show and a few catchy theme songs, but back to Static. He's always existed in a strange space within DC Comics, like so many characters that don't really get their full due for all kinds of reasons between Marvel and DC and the big publishers. He's arguably one of the most recognizable black superheroes across comics and animated shows and everything. He's obviously had a great animated show, and he featured my favorite DC animated show, Batman Beyond, which really helped me get into the Static Shock show and helped grow my appreciation for the comics and the larger Milestone universe, or the Dakotaverse. And yet for years he's felt oddly distant from the larger DC universe. But there's that unspoken distance, like your relationship with that one family member. It's just a little weird. Not forgotten, of course, just misplaced and weird. With opportunities and stories where he could have given the overall plot a much needed boost if he were there. So before we get too far, who is Static exactly, and what's with the vagueness of his involvement with the larger DC universe? Well, to start, if you don't already know, he's not originally a DC character in the same way that some of the classic characters are. Static, along with Icon, Rocket, and Hardware to name a few, come from Milestone Comics, an imprint of DC's dating back to the 90s when they started. Milestone and DC basically shared publishing. Each of their logos were printed on the books in the usual spots, and Milestone benefited from the more established publishing channels of DC. As far as their involvement in the main DC universe, originally they are set up in two distinct universes within the comics and occasionally crossing over in typical comic book fashion, leading to Static getting to interact with other big DC names. Dakota City is the main hub for a couple of Milestone heroes, and especially Static. It was originally in its own universe. This universe for the Milestone comics was often referred to as the Dakotaverse. However, eventually, DC, through some pivotal timeline shakeups, made the Dakotaverse integrated more fully with the main DC Earth, or Prime Earth. This eventually made Dakota City another fixture in the main timeline for Static and other Milestone characters. To say Static's story isn't like most is a bit of an understatement. But to fully appreciate who Static is and where he comes from, let's jump into his first appearance, particularly the first two issues of his self-titled book back from 1993. The story opens up with a girl on her way to an arcade. I really wish that was still a local fixture in today's world, but it's, you know. The girl's name is Frida. She's supposed to be meeting a friend here, but when she walks in, it's not her friends that greet her. It's the 5 Alarm crew, a gang led by a villain named Hotstreak. Hotstreak wants to see her and get acquainted. Static bursts through the front door in time to interrupt the crew from taking Frida, using his taser punch to send a quick message to our villains. Static uses all kinds of quips in between blows as he dismantles the crew, using his electricity to bond two goons to each other while they're trying to wrestle Static to the ground, tying some up with materials around the spot and sending others flying through the arcade. He wraps the rest up with a bowling ball of electricity to take out the last ones trying to run away. As he receives applause from the crowd, he checks in on Frida and heads off to change out of his supersuit and run home. He thinks he can time it just right so he can get home and get the details on what just happened from Frida. Because as it turns out, Frida and Virgil, who's also Static, are friends. She doesn't know he's Static yet, and there's a bit of a crush thing going on here. Virgil gets home, gets into it with his mom, and then onto his room, where he's just in time to get Frida's call. Virgil throws some flirtatiousness and some overconfident quips in there, while he plays dumb to the whole Static situation and listens to Frida tell him how Static saved her life. The conversation goes on long enough into the night that Static wakes up a bit drained. He has a little to eat and talks with his mother before she goes to work, and then heads off to school. We get to see what it's like in Virgil's world before homeroom. Lots of quips and jabs back and forth among friends and classmates. Some dig a little too deep, but as everyone gets to sit, something happens. The 5 Alarm crew interrupts the teacher, demanding that Frida report to Principal Hotstreak's office. The teacher tells them all to get lost, and Arsenio, one of the crew, can take a seat and empty his pockets before he does so. Tells the teach he's only got one weapon for her, and she says all the microscopes are in the chemistry department, so she'll have to take his word for it. He doesn't like that answer, so he pistol whips her as they demand Frida come with them. Larry, who we saw earlier with Virgil, tries to whisper to Virgil about a plan to take some of the crew out and stop them. But when he turns around, Virgil is gone. He's suited up and on his way to take on Hotstreak at the playground that they use for a base. Virgil regrets not beating up more of his crew back at the arcade when he had a chance. Meanwhile, Hotstreak is talking with Frida as the crew brings her in. He tells her he wanted her not just because she's his type, but because they think Static has an affinity for her too, and Hotstreak really wants to give it to Static. Frida pushes back, saying she's nobody's girly, and Hotstreak continues to pour on the intimidation, showing he's got super speed and fire manipulation abilities. Frida tells him Static's gonna have him for breakfast, but Static yells out that he actually brought his own. He flies in and gets right to it with Hotstreak. Static learns quickly just how fast this guy is, and the second he gets him tied up with some chain, Static realizes who Hotstreak is. And in that hesitation, Hotstreak melts the chains and puts the beat down on Static until he's in a ball on the ground. Hotstreak tells him to never show his face again in the city, in the school, in the yard, never come back. A wounded Static lays in Frida's arms on the ground. Frida's confused, asking him what happened. He had him on the ropes. Static says he can't. She doesn't understand he can't, and he pulls back his mask, showing her his face. And this is technically where Static's first appearance ends. This is the first issue, and this is where it ends. And normally I would stop here and move on to reading recommendations and all that, but like so many characters and even so many videos now that I've done this a lot more, this really isn't the full picture, and we have to continue on to the second issue to answer some of our burning questions from all of this. Why is Static so scared? What happened? Where do his powers come from? And we get these answers in issue number 2. And this issue opens up with Frida again, confused on what happened. Static had him on the ropes. What's the deal? Virgil doesn't want to get into it. He feels worse than he looks after that beating. Frida pushes and tells him to stop taking shots at himself in the process, pressing him to tell her how he'd even gotten to be a superhero. He's reluctant, but starts to tell her, all the way back to the first day that they met. She had just transferred homerooms and walks into Virgil cracking jokes and being his eccentric self with his friends. She asks him if he tutors math, just as someone named BizMoney B yells out to Frida and pins himself and her against the wall of the lockers in front of Virgil, interrupting their conversation. He tells her he wants her number, and she gets out of there quickly with a great amount of wit, telling Virgil that she'll call him later. While Virgil's stunned that she said she'll call him later, BizMoney B grabs him and throws him into the lockers out of anger. He roughs Virgil up pretty good. Virgil can't help but let out some tears, and it's high school, so there's laughing and staring at all of this instead of helping. Larry helps Virgil out and gets Biz off him. He tells him to back off, and next time he wants anything to do with either of them, deal with him first. Biz walks off, and Larry walks Virgil down to the bus, telling him he likes him. He's about something. Virgil's about something, unlike so many other kids. But the next few years aren't going to be any better if he doesn't do something about people like Biz picking on him. He tells him that he can get him a gun if he needs it. He says don't do something you can't back up, but also don't do nothing, and he leaves him with that. It's not all that much better once he gets home. Virgil's mom tells him about how they moved away to keep Virgil from the gangs, and now these white boys are all over him. And she continues to tell him about how his father could have done such great things, but he let some country fool take the scholarship and he didn't even finish with it. She ends with telling him not to be like his father, not to let other people push you out of something. As he gets to his room, a little downtrodden, Frida calls him, hoping to make his day but also apologize for what happened to him. And Virgil, even with all this bad stuff, still has a few quips left in him. Frida tells him that people like Biz always seem to know who to pick on, telling Virgil she knew he's not all about that macho stuff. He's not one to go beating up people who disagree with him, which in the way she says it doesn't really hit Virgil as a compliment or an uplifting moment. Frida and Virgil in the present day reflect on that conversation, as Virgil continues telling her about what he did next, feeling the way he did from the bullies, how everyone saw him, and now what Frida thinks of him. His friend, Larry Wade from earlier, actually comes through and gets Virgil the gun that he wants. Wade tells him how to use it and gives it to him for free, telling him that Biz will be at the bang later that night. Virgil can take him out without any extra questions. It'll just be another dead gangbanger in the middle of the chaos. Virgil finds his spot, lines up his shot, thinking to himself, he isn't a loser, he isn't a walking bullseye, and he can't take it anymore. But he stops himself, saying also to himself, he isn't a killer either. He walks to the end of one of the docks and tosses the gun in the water. Just as he tries to think where to go next, the police find him. The police are everywhere, taking out and fighting the gangs. Bright lights, and then the gas is deployed to put everyone out. But as the gas is deployed, it starts killing people, eating through the masks of even the SWAT officers. It's important to note here, this is a huge part of Milestone Comics lore. This is the moment that really creates so many of the stories and becomes like this starting point for so many Milestone stories. So what's not mentioned explicitly here is the quantum juice, the extra compound that was added and laced with the gas that ends up being responsible for these powers, abilities, and killing all these people. But Virgil's out cold and wakes up with a pounding headache, seeing all the people laid out on the street. Virgil is cornered again and inadvertently uses new powers to escape, unsure of what's happening or really how he can do what he can now do, but he ends up making it away. He flies off and through some initial trial and error learns to do a lot more with his powers. So as any high schooler would, he sews a suit and got to work, using his powers for a larger good, taking out crack houses, busting up gangs, and more, all until that day with Hotstreak, also known as Biz Money. In a renewed spirit, after talking this all out with Frida, knowing he won't feel better until he's faced up with Hotstreak, Static gets out of the house and flies over to where Hotstreak is reveling in his story of beating up Static. Static drops in on Biz Money with a story about how he's figured out how Hotstreak's powers work, deducing that maybe he generates and stores up massive amounts of heat as he moves, and to offload that heat, he expels the fire from his hands and into items as he throws them, charging them up with the heat he stores like a battery. But if Static ties him up first, as he does while he says this, he takes away his ability to move. He can't generate the heat. Without the heat or the speed, he's just another guy. A yo-yo in a cheap suit, as Static calls him here. And sure enough, it works. To the point of Static telling him he's not going to bother anyone, his friends, his cousin's friends, nobody. And Static broadcasts it on the boomboxes for Hotstreak's whole crew to hear. And later, he tells Frida about it. Static boldly asks for a hero's reward, and she turns him down, telling him she was overwhelmed at first, but she really thinks of them as just friends. And that's where Static's origin and his first appearance really concludes. There's a ton more to read and dive into throughout his first complete run, and it's really fun to read. I would highly recommend you read this first before getting to the newer stuff. Personally, I enjoy a lot of the original Milestone era and what it brings to DC later on as a whole. I really like how the Bang didn't just create Static, it created hundreds of metahumans, many of whom would become villains, victims, or both. It's just really interesting, everything it either overtly or subtly forces on the larger universe. Static's powers are literally born from the same event that forever traumatized him, his friends, his family, and his city, and most of his villains. Right from the start, his story and the rest of the Milestone lineup asks a very different question than most superhero comics. It's this: what happens when power doesn't solve the problem, but exposes it in some way? And so it gives everyone a chance to answer with what they want to say with however much power they have. And we just get to see the weight of that across Static's development over time, even in the Static Shock show, which I think is something that everybody loves it for. It's something that I know a lot of people appreciate and what Milestone brought to the comic world and superhero storytelling as a whole. So just briefly, let's cover his core abilities before we get into some reading recommendations for more Static. So his powers really stem from electromagnetism, which I think is pretty clear. What that allows him to do is things like electrokinesis, which is basically Static can generate, absorb, and manipulate electricity. He can fire electric blasts, which you often see him do, which is, it can be used for stunning, it can be used for more lethal applications, which he doesn't usually do. As we obviously saw, he's no killer. He creates electrical fields. He can overload machines or short out tech, and as he controls his powers more and more, we actually see him use his powers to disable and control machines and manipulate them to whatever he needs them to do, rather than just overloading something and just blowing crap up. So obviously with electromagnetism, we can magnetize metal, objects, weapons, even enemies when they have metallic things on them, and just using the static to literally cling people to each other, which we saw in the first issue. He can attract and repel metallic objects, he can manipulate metal, and obviously this kind of leads him into like Magneto territory with being able to control magnetism and metal and stuff. So what he obviously does a lot is fly on some kind of metal disc, like a manhole cover, a trash can lid, or just whatever he can find, like a trash can, which lets him fly. And what I think is really, really cool, which we see often as you continue reading static stuff, is like when he's able to cast electric nets or cages or whips or just items out of the energy, which is just really cool. He's got enhanced mobility and reflexes. He can use his electromagnetism and stuff to sort of give him jolts and bursts of maneuverability. And he's got a sense for energy and electronics. So that's something that's just kind of innate and subtle with his powers. But that's sort of the gist of what he can do. So now if you want to continue to dive into Static's world and his best stories, I have a few recommendations just to get you started. These are not exhaustive or anything, but I'll put all these in the description as well, so feel free to reference these. But if you want to start from the beginning, like we just did, start with the original run. We just covered the first 2 issues of it. I would recommend at least reading through issue number 4 of this run. If not, reading all the way to at least around the halfway point, which is like issue 20. There's lots to enjoy there, or just read the entire run if you're liking it that much by that point. No matter what you do there, it'll make reading the next thing even better. So after you make a decision on all of those for yourself, I would recommend jumping to Static Shock, Rebirth of the Cool. This time it's actually called Static Shock, so don't get angry at me. Then I would recommend checking out the Terror Titans era. So he's part of the Teen Titans and stuff, and specifically a good chunk of the Terror Titans era, which is not for everybody, but I think it's really interesting. I'll have specific issues and references for all of that in the description, so you can check those out. But this era was cool for a number of reasons. I just really think Static looks awesome in these, and I think him versus Ravager is really cool because of my love for the Deathstroke lore too, so I'm a little biased. My last couple essential reads for this list are a part of the Milestone Returns line. So we have Static Season 1, which I think has a DC compact printing of it. So that's pretty cheap to jump into if you like the smaller form factor of those. I know the pages are supposed to be a little less nice than like the traditional trade paperbacks and everything, but for like $10 to get into a story, it's not bad. Then we have the Static Shadows of Dakota series, which takes place after season 1, which is also a really good read. And honorable mention before we wrap up today is the Batman Beyond and Static comic that's out right now. I've read the first 2 issues and so far it's pretty cool. So that's also worth getting into if you make it through everything else and you just really need more Static, or if you just want to see a modern interpretation of Static and Batman doing their thing, specifically Batman Beyond. But again, thank you everyone for watching. If you have recommendations for characters you'd like to see, underrated people that don't get enough love, drop a comment. I know people have been asking for more villains recently, so I'm going to drop a video on the Upside Down Man and Dr. Doom soon, and a few others coming up soon. So subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss those when they drop, and I'll see you all in the next one.